She agreed to a blind date just to please her friend, and the man waiting was her millionaire boss. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew tonight would change everything. She just didn't know how. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hartley & Associates' corporate tower, each droplet racing down the glass like tears the building couldn't shed. On the 23rd floor, Camilla Topaz pressed her fingertips against her temples, staring at the spreadsheet that seemed to mock her with its endless rows of numbers. 28 years old, with rich mahogany skin that glowed even under the harsh fluorescent lights, Camilla possessed the kind of natural beauty that didn't announce itself. It whispered. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek, low bun, revealing the elegant curve of her neck and the small gold hoops that caught the light when she moved. She wore a crisp white blouse and navy blazer, professional armor that she'd perfected over the years. "Still here, Cam?" Jasmine's voice broke through her concentration. Her colleague peered over the cubicle wall, concern etched across her features. "It's almost 8. Camilla glanced at her watch. 7:47 p.m. The office had emptied hours ago, leaving only the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew's vacuum. She'd lost track of time again, buried in quarterly reports and budget projections that needed to be perfect before tomorrow's board meeting. "Just finishing the Whitmore account analysis," she replied, her voice carrying the slight rasp that came from too much coffee and not enough sleep. "You know how Mr. Keller is about precision." At the mention of Kevin Keller, both women fell silent. The company's founder and CEO was legendary for his exacting standards, his ice-cold demeanor in meetings, and his ability to make grown executives stumble over their words with a single glance. In 3 years at Hartley & Associates, Camilla had probably exchanged no more than 50 words with him, all strictly professional, all carefully measured. "Speaking of perfection," Jasmine said, sliding around the cubicle wall to perch on Camilla's desk, "I have something that might interest you." Camilla saved her work and leaned back in her chair, already sensing where this conversation was heading. Jasmine had that look, the same one she'd worn when she'd tried to set Camilla up with her cousin's friend, or when she'd suggested that salsa dancing class that Camilla had politely declined. "Jazz, we've talked about this." "Before you say no," Jasmine held up a perfectly manicured hand, "hear me out. My friend Delilah has this client. Investment banker, mid-30s, supposedly gorgeous, and, get this, he specifically asked for someone intelligent and independent. Not some Instagram model looking for a sugar daddy." Camilla's fingers found the small scar on her left ring finger, a nervous habit she'd developed since David. 2 years had passed since that relationship had imploded, leaving her with trust issues she was still working through, and a firm belief that her career was far more reliable than any man could ever be. "I'm not ready," she said quietly, turning back to her screen. "Besides, you know how these blind dates go. Awkward small talk, forced chemistry, and then you're both checking your phones by dessert." "Or," Jasmine countered, "it could be exactly what you need. When's the last time you did something just for you? Something that wasn't work or paying bills or taking care of everyone else?" Camilla considered this. Her life had become a carefully structured routine. Wake up at 6 a.m., gym, work, grocery store, home, Netflix, sleep, repeat. Weekends were for laundry, meal prep, and catching up on projects she couldn't finish during the week. It was safe, predictable, and utterly void of surprises. "Where?" she heard herself ask, surprising them both. Jasmine's face lit up. "Meridian, downtown. Saturday night, 8 o'clock. I already made the reservation under Thompson." "You what?" Camilla's eyes widened. "Jasmine, you can't just—" "I can, and I did. Look, if it's terrible, you can leave after an hour. But if it's not—" She stood up, gathering her purse and coat. "Maybe you'll remember what it feels like to laugh with someone who isn't me complaining about office coffee." As Jasmine's heels clicked toward the elevator, Camilla found herself alone with the rain and her thoughts. Meridian was upscale, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She'd need to find something to wear that was nice enough for the venue, but not so nice that she looked like she was trying too hard. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "His name is Kevin. Tall, dark hair, blue eyes. He'll be wearing a charcoal suit. Can't miss him." Camilla stared at the message, her stomach doing something between a flutter and a knot. A charcoal suit. She'd been around enough executives to know that expensive suits had their own language, their own confidence. What would a man like that want with someone like her? She glanced up at the darkened corner office on the floor above, where a single light still burned behind frosted glass. Kevin Keller's office. The man worked as late as she did, maybe later. Sometimes she wondered if he ever went home, or if the office was home for people like him, people who built empires but forgot to build lives. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the city skyline for a brief moment before plunging it back into darkness. Camilla made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She was going to that dinner. What she didn't know was that 24 floors above her, Kevin Keller was staring out his own rain-streaked window, holding his phone and reading a text from his assistant Delilah about a dinner reservation that had been made for him at a restaurant he'd never heard of. And in that moment, neither of them realized that destiny had already begun to weave its careful web around their carefully guarded hearts. Some coincidences are too perfect to be accidents. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Camilla change her outfit 3 times. She stood before her bedroom mirror in a simple black dress that hugged her curves without being too revealing, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. The fabric felt expensive against her skin, a rare splurge from last year's bonus that she'd never had occasion to wear. Her reflection showed a woman trying to look confident while battling butterflies that felt more like hawks. She'd straightened her natural curls into a sleek bob that framed her heart-shaped face, and her makeup was understated but flawless, highlighting her warm brown eyes and full lips with just enough gloss to catch the light. "It's just dinner," she whispered to herself, grabbing her small clutch and the black wrap that would protect her from the October chill. 1 hour, maybe 2, then back to real life. The Uber ride downtown gave her too much time to think. What if he was boring? What if he only talked about stocks and golf? What if he took one look at her and decided she wasn't what he'd expected? She'd been through enough awkward dates to know that chemistry couldn't be forced, no matter how well-meaning the matchmaker. Meridian Restaurant sat nestled between 2 art galleries in the heart of the financial district, its warm golden light spilling onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. Through the large windows, Camilla could see intimate tables set with crisp white linens and fresh orchids, the soft glow of candles creating an atmosphere that whispered of romance and possibility. She paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath that tasted of autumn rain and expensive cologne from passing businessmen. The hostess, a stunning redhead with a smile that seemed genuine, greeted her warmly. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Thompson, party of 2, Camilla replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe I'm the first to arrive. Right this way, please." The restaurant was busier than she'd expected for a Saturday night, filled with couples leaning across tables in animated conversation and groups of friends celebrating something that made them laugh loud enough to draw smiles from neighboring tables. The hostess led her to a corner table with a perfect view of the street, where rain continued to paint abstract patterns on the windows. "Your server will be right with you. Can I start you with anything to drink while you wait?" "Just water for now, thank you." Camilla settled into her chair, placing her clutch on the table and checking her phone. 7:58 p.m. She was exactly on time, which meant she'd probably be waiting a few minutes. She used the time to people watch, a habit that had served her well in understanding office dynamics and reading clients' moods. At 8:03, she heard the hostess's voice behind her. "Mr. Keller, right this way." Camilla's blood turned to ice. There were probably dozens of Kellers in the city, she told herself. Probably hundreds. It was a common enough name, and the universe wasn't cruel enough to... "I believe this is your table." Camilla turned slowly, and time seemed to suspend itself in amber. Kevin Keller stood 3 feet away, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his dark hair slightly mussed from the rain, and his startling blue eyes wide with the same shock that had stolen her breath. He was taller than she remembered from their brief encounters in the office, with broad shoulders that filled out his jacket, and the kind of confident posture that came from years of commanding boardrooms. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hostess looked between them, confusion flickering across her features. There must be some mistake," Camilla managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Kevin's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but held traces of amusement. "Achei que encontros às cegas não eram o seu tipo, Miss Topaz." The fact that he'd spoken in Portuguese, her grandmother's language that she'd mentioned exactly once in a company meeting about international clients, sent another shock through her system. His accent was slight but perfect, suggesting time spent in Brazil that she'd never known about. "Mr. Keller," she breathed, rising from her chair on unsteady legs. What are you doing here? Apparently, he said, his voice carrying that low rumble she'd heard in exactly 7 board meetings, the same thing you are. He looked at the hostess, who was still hovering uncertainly. Thank you. We're fine. As the hostess retreated, Kevin moved to pull out Camilla's chair, a gesture so unexpected and gentlemanly that she found herself sitting before she'd consciously decided to stay. This is, Camilla started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Mortifying? Awkward? A complete disaster? Kevin suggested, taking his own seat across from her. Up close, she could see laugh lines around his eyes that office lighting had never revealed, and a small scar through his left eyebrow that somehow made him more human. I was going to say unexpected, she replied, surprised to find herself almost smiling. Kevin's expression softened. Delilah mentioned she had someone in mind, someone intelligent, independent, beautiful. His eyes met hers directly. She failed to mention it was someone I already knew was all of those things. The compliment landed between them like a small gift, unexpected and precious. Camilla felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the candlelight that might hide her blush. Your assistant set this up, she asked. My assistant who happens to be friends with someone named Jasmine, I'm guessing. Kevin's mouth quirked upward. Here it seems we've been the victims of a very elaborate conspiracy. Despite everything, the shock, the awkwardness, the complete upheaval of her carefully planned evening, Camilla found herself laughing. A real laugh, the kind that started in her chest and bubbled up before she could stop it. I'm going to kill Jasmine, she said, shaking her head. Let's kill them together, Kevin replied, and this time his smile was full and genuine, transforming his entire face. But first, since we're already here and I've been looking forward to good food all week, would you be willing to stay? Just as 2 people who happen to work in the same building, sharing a meal. Camilla studied his face, looking for any trace of the ice-cold executive she knew from the office. Instead, she saw a man who looked almost nervous, his fingers drumming silently against the white tablecloth, waiting for her answer. The smart thing would be to leave, to politely excuse herself, maintain professional boundaries and pretend this had never happened. But when was the last time she'd done something that wasn't smart? I suppose we could stay, she said slowly. Since we're already here. Kevin's relief was visible, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Their server appeared as if summoned, a young man with an eager smile who launched into the evening's specials with enthusiasm. As he spoke about pan-seared duck and truffle risotto, Camilla caught Kevin watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, and in that moment, she realized that everything she thought she knew about Kevin Keller was about to change, starting with the way he was looking at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. The most dangerous conversations are the ones that feel effortless. 2 hours later, their plates sat forgotten between them, remnants of pan-seared salmon and herb-crusted lamb growing cold as words flowed like the wine Kevin had ordered, a Malbec that tasted like velvet and made everything feel slightly more possible. Wait, you're telling me you speak 4 languages? Camilla asked, leaning forward with genuine amazement. The formal distance she'd maintained at the beginning of the evening had gradually dissolved, replaced by the kind of comfortable posture that came with unexpected discovery. Kevin's smile was self-deprecating as he swirled the wine in his glass. Portuguese from 2 years in São Paulo expanding the company's Latin American division, French because my mother insisted, and enough Mandarin to not embarrass myself with our Shanghai clients. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. Though I have to admit, my Portuguese is rusty. I haven't had anyone to practice with in years. Minha avó ficaria impressionada, Camilla said softly, the words flowing naturally. She always said a man who takes time to learn another person's language is a man worth knowing. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Camilla's fingers found the pearl earrings, a gesture Kevin noticed but didn't comment on. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. Taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up with grace. The vulnerability in her voice created a shift in the air between them, something deeper than dinner conversation. Kevin set down his wine glass, his expression growing serious. I'm sorry, that must have been incredibly difficult. It was, but she made sure I never saw myself as a victim. Camilla, she'd say, life will try to write your story for you. Don't let it. Some of the memory brought a soft smile to her lips. She would have loved this place. She had a thing for elegant restaurants and handsome men in expensive suits. Would she have approved of me? Kevin asked, and there was something almost boyish in the question. as if her grandmother's hypothetical opinion actually mattered to him. Camilla studied his face, the sharp jawline softened by candlelight, the way his usually perfect hair had relaxed throughout the evening, the genuine interest in his blue eyes that seemed to see her rather than simply look at her. "I think she would have said you have good hands," she replied finally. Kevin glanced down at his hands, confused. Good hands? She believed you could tell everything about a person by their hands. Yours are... Camilla hesitated, realizing she was about to cross a line from polite dinner conversation into something more intimate. They're strong but gentle. You don't wear flashy watches or rings to prove your worth, and you actually listen when people talk. Most powerful men just wait for their turn to speak. Kevin was quiet for a moment, absorbing this assessment. When he looked up, his expression held something raw and unguarded. "You see a lot more than most people give you credit for," he said quietly. "In meetings, you're always watching, analyzing, understanding dynamics that other people miss entirely. I've noticed." "You've noticed me in meetings?" The question slipped out before Camilla could stop it, and she immediately felt exposed. Camilla. The way he said her name, not Ms. Topaz, not the formal distance of the office, made her pulse quicken. "I've noticed everything about you. The way you tap your pen when you're thinking, how you bite your lower lip when you disagree with something but don't want to speak up. The fact that you stay late, not because you have to, but because you genuinely care about doing excellent work." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle mist, and the restaurant had grown quieter as other diners filtered out into the night. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kevin's laugh was soft and self-aware. "Because I'm your boss, and crossing that line would be..." He trailed off, seeming to realize that they were currently sitting in a restaurant, sharing wine and intimate conversations, having already crossed every line he'd just referenced. "Inappropriate," Camilla suggested, though her tone held no judgment. "Dangerous," he corrected, his eyes never leaving hers. "For both of us." The server appeared discreetly at their table, clearly reluctant to interrupt but bound by professional duty. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we're beginning to close the kitchen. Can I offer you dessert or coffee?" Camilla glanced around, surprised to see that they were among the last remaining diners. Time had somehow folded in on itself, turning what should have been a quick, awkward encounter into an evening that felt both endless and far too short. "Just the check, please," Kevin said, already reaching for his wallet. "Oh no, we should split," Camilla began, but Kevin's raised hand stopped her. "Please, this was supposed to be a date, even if neither of us planned it this way." As the server disappeared, an awkward silence settled between them. The end of the evening was approaching, and with it, the return to reality, to Monday morning meetings and professional boundaries, and the careful distance they'd maintained for 3 years. "I should call an Uber," Camilla said, though she made no move to reach for her phone. "I could drive you home," Kevin offered. "I know it's not far from here." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "How do you know where I live?" Kevin's cheeks actually flushed, a humanizing detail that made him seem less like the untouchable CEO and more like a man who'd been caught revealing more interest than was strictly professional. "Company emergency contact forms," he admitted. "I may have noticed the address when I was reviewing employee files last month." "You were reviewing my file?" "I review all my employees' files," he said quickly, then paused. "But I may have spent more time on yours than was strictly necessary." The admission created a flutter of warmth in Camilla's chest that she tried desperately to suppress. This was madness. Kevin Keller, her boss, her company's founder, a man who probably dated supermodels and socialites, was sitting across from her admitting that he'd been paying attention to her for months. "Kevin," she said carefully, testing his name on her lips for the first time. "What are we doing here?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming serious again. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I don't want this evening to end." And in that moment, Camilla realized that she was standing at the edge of a precipice that would change everything, and she wasn't sure if she was brave enough to jump. Some silences say everything that words cannot. Monday morning arrived like a cold slap of reality. Camilla sat in her car outside Hartley and Associates, watching other employees stream through the glass doors with their coffee cups and Monday morning expressions of resigned determination. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she tried to summon the courage to walk into a building that had suddenly become a minefield. 2 days had passed since the dinner. 2 days of replaying every word, every look, every moment, when Kevin's fingers had accidentally brushed hers as he reached for the wine bottle. 2 days of staring at her phone, wondering if he was thinking about her too, wondering what would happen when they saw each other again. She'd dressed carefully, a burgundy blouse that brought out the warmth in her skin, paired with her favorite black pencil skirt and heels that made her feel confident. Professional armor with just a hint of the woman who had laughed over wine and shared stories about her grandmother. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt endless. When the doors opened, Camilla stepped into the familiar maze of cubicles and conference rooms, everything exactly as she'd left it Friday evening. Everything except the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Girl, you are glowing," Jasmine announced the moment Camilla reached her desk. "That dinner was good to you." Camilla shot her a look that could have melted steel. "We need to talk. Conference room. Now." 5 minutes later, they sat across from each other at the small round table used for informal meetings, Jasmine wearing an expression of barely contained glee, while Camilla struggled to find words that wouldn't result in her committing a workplace homicide. "You set me up," Camilla said finally, her voice deadly calm, "with my boss. I set you up with a gorgeous, successful man who happens to—" "Wait, what?" Jasmine's eyes widened. "Your boss? Kevin Thompson?" "Kevin Keller," Camilla corrected. "As in the owner of this company, as in the man who signs my paychecks, as in the person who could fire me for having dinner with him." Jasmine's mouth fell open. "Oh my God. Delilah said his name was Kevin, and he was some kind of businessman, but I never— Oh my God, Cam, I'm so sorry, I had no idea." Despite her anger, Camilla felt the fight drain out of her at Jasmine's genuine horror. Her friend's matchmaking had been misguided, but it hadn't been malicious. "What happened?" Jasmine asked quietly. "Was it awful? Did you leave immediately?" "No," Camilla admitted, her voice softer now. "We stayed. We talked. She trailed off, unsure how to explain the evening without revealing how much it had affected her. And now I don't know what happens next." Before Jasmine could respond, Camilla's phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender's name made her pulse skip. Kevin Keller. Subject: Whitmore account review, Ms. Topaz, please see me in my office at 10 a.m. to discuss the quarterly projections. Thank you, KK. The message was perfectly professional, revealing nothing of Saturday night's conversation or the way he'd said her name like it meant something. But somehow, the simple KK signature felt intimate, a small deviation from his usual formal, "Kevin Keller, CEO." "Work?" Jasmine asked, noticing Camilla's expression. "He wants to see me in his office." "About Saturday?" "About the Whitmore account," Camilla replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced that was all it was about. At 9:58 a.m., Camilla stood outside Kevin's office, smoothing her skirt and trying to regulate her breathing. Through the frosted glass, she could see his silhouette at his desk, head bent over paperwork. She knocked softly. "Come in." Kevin looked up as she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He was back in his usual uniform, perfectly pressed navy suit, crisp white shirt, silk tie in a subtle pattern that probably cost more than her monthly car payment. But she could see traces of Saturday night in the way his eyes lingered on her face, in the slight softening around his mouth. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city, expensive furniture that whispered success, framed awards and photos with politicians and celebrities. But there were also unexpected details. A small succulent on his windowsill, a worn leather journal beside his computer, a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Boss," that seemed completely at odds with his serious image. "About Saturday," he began, then stopped, his jaw tightening slightly. "I want you to know that what happened won't affect your position here. Your work speaks for itself, and your personal time is your own." The formal tone stung more than Camilla had expected. This was the CEO speaking, not the man who had asked about her grandmother's opinion or admitted to noticing the way she bit her lip during meetings. "Of course," she replied, matching his professional distance. "I have the Whitmore projections ready for review." She opened her portfolio and spread the papers across his desk, careful not to let their fingers touch as she explained the quarterly numbers. But she was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way he listened with complete attention, the occasional moment when she felt his gaze on her face rather than the spreadsheets. "This analysis is excellent," he said when she finished. "Thorough, insightful. You've identified potential problems I hadn't considered. Thank you." Another silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Kevin leaned back in his chair, his professional mask slipping slightly. "Camilla," he said quietly, and her name on his lips sent the same shiver down her spine it had Saturday night. "Are we going to be able to work together? After everything?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address directly. Camilla met his gaze, seeing the man behind the title, the one who'd shared stories about learning Portuguese and admitted to reviewing her employee file more than necessary. "I'm a professional, Mr. Keller," she said finally, though her use of his formal title felt like a small betrayal after the intimacy of Saturday night. "I've never had trouble separating my personal life from my work." Something flickered across his expression. Disappointment, maybe, or relief. "Good. That's good." She gathered her papers, preparing to leave, when his voice stopped her at the door. "Camilla." She turned back, and for a moment, his guard was completely down. She saw uncertainty there, vulnerability, and something that looked dangerously like longing. "Saturday was—" He paused, searching for words. "It was the best evening I've had in years." Before she could respond, before she could process the admission or figure out what it meant, his phone rang. Kevin glanced at the caller ID and his expression shifted back to business mode. "I need to take this," he said apologetically. Camilla nodded and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. She leaned against the wall for a moment, her heart racing and her mind spinning with questions that had no easy answers. And as she walked back to her desk, she realized that Kevin Keller had just made everything infinitely more complicated, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to run away or run straight back to his office. The hardest person to lie to is yourself. 3 weeks passed in a careful dance of avoidance and stolen glances. Camilla perfected the art of being present but invisible, arriving at meetings precisely on time, speaking only when spoken to, keeping her eyes fixed on notebooks and laptops, rather than the man who sat at the head of the conference table, with his perfectly knotted ties and increasingly tired eyes. But late at night, alone in her apartment with a cup of tea and the city lights painting patterns on her walls, she allowed herself to remember the way Kevin's laugh had transformed his entire face, how his voice had softened when he said her name, the moment his fingers had brushed hers, and electricity had sparked between them like a live wire. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected disruption to their careful choreography. Camilla was deep in budget reconciliations when her computer chimed with a calendar notification. Emergency board meeting, conference room A, all department heads and senior analysts required. She gathered her materials with practiced efficiency, steeling herself for another hour of sitting in the same room as Kevin, while pretending he was just another executive in an expensive suit. But when she entered the conference room, she found only Kevin pacing behind the large mahogany table, his usually perfect composure cracked around the edges. "Where is everyone?" she asked, glancing at her watch. She was exactly on time. Kevin stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "There is no meeting." "I don't understand. I sent that calendar invite to you alone." He ran a hand through his hair, messing the perfectly styled dark strands. "I needed to talk to you, and you've been avoiding me for 3 weeks. Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've been working." "You've been hiding," Kevin said quietly, moving closer to where she stood, frozen by the door. "And I've been going crazy trying to figure out if Saturday night meant anything to you, or if I'm losing my mind." The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. This wasn't the commanding CEO she'd known for 3 years. This was a man who looked like he hadn't been sleeping well, whose usual confidence had been replaced by uncertainty. "Kevin, we can't what? Talk like human beings. Acknowledge that something happened between us. You're my boss," she said desperately, as if saying it aloud might build a wall between them that her treacherous heart couldn't tear down. "I know what I am," Kevin replied, his voice rough, "but that night at Meridian I wasn't your boss. I was just a man having dinner with an extraordinary woman who made me remember what it felt like to want something more than quarterly profits and board approval." The words hit her like a physical blow. Camilla gripped her portfolio tighter, using it as a shield against the intensity in his blue eyes. "This is insane," she whispered. "You could have anyone. Models, socialites, women who move in your world." "I don't want anyone else," Kevin interrupted, taking another step closer. "I want the woman who sees through corporate bullshit and calls it like it is. I want someone who works late because she cares, not because she's trying to impress people. I want—" He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he was revealing too much. "What?" Camilla asked, her voice barely audible. You, he said simply. I want you, Camilla, and I hope, you might want me too. The confession hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. Outside the conference room windows, the city hummed with its usual Thursday afternoon energy, people hurrying to meetings and appointments, living lives that didn't hinge on moments like this one. Even if I did, she said carefully, what then? Office relationships are complicated enough without adding power dynamics to the mix. You could fire me tomorrow and I'd have no recourse. Is that what you think of me? Kevin's expression shifted to something that looked genuinely hurt. That I would use my position to manipulate you? No, Camilla said quickly, realizing how her words had sounded. I don't think that. But other people would. They'd say I slept my way to better assignments, that any success I had was because of who I was dating rather than my abilities. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, processing this. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. You're right. The optics would be challenging. He moved to the window, staring out at the skyline. But I can't pretend Saturday night didn't happen. I can't pretend I don't think about you constantly, that I don't look for you in every meeting, that I don't have to force myself not to find excuses to walk by your desk. The admission sent warmth flooding through Camilla's chest, dangerous and intoxicating. She joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance but allowing herself to really look at him for the first time in weeks. Up close, she could see the faint lines of stress around his eyes, the slight shadow of exhaustion that spoke to sleepless nights. You've been thinking about me? She asked softly. Kevin's laugh was self-deprecating. Camilla, I've been thinking about you for months. Saturday night just made it impossible to pretend otherwise. She turned to face him fully, and the space between them suddenly felt charged with electricity. What are you saying? I'm saying that I know this is complicated, and I know all the reasons why it's a terrible idea. His eyes met hers, intense and unwavering. But I'm also saying that I've never felt this way about anyone before, and I don't want to walk away without knowing if you feel even a fraction of what I do. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings about professionalism and complications, and all the ways this could end badly. But her heart, her treacherous, hopeful heart, was remembering the way he'd listened to her stories about her grandmother, the gentle way he'd said her name, the feeling that she'd found someone who truly saw her. Kevin, she whispered, his name a prayer and a confession all at once. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones with reverent care, as if she were something precious and fragile. Tell me to stop, he said quietly, his forehead nearly touching hers. Tell me this is crazy and we should forget Saturday ever happened, and I'll walk away right now. I'll transfer you to another department. I'll make sure our paths never cross professionally again. Just say the word. Camilla looked into his eyes, these blue eyes that had haunted her dreams for 3 weeks, and realized she was standing at the edge of the precipice she'd felt that night at Meridian. One word could end this before it began, could restore the safe, predictable distance she'd maintained for years, but safety had never felt more like a prison. And in that moment, with Kevin's hands framing her face and his heart laid bare between them, Camilla realized that some risks were worth taking, even if they changed everything. Some moments change everything, and there's no going back. Time suspended itself in that conference room, the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and painting golden rectangles across the mahogany table. Kevin's hands were warm against Camilla's skin, his blue eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world. She could hear her pulse thundering in her ears, could feel the weight of the decision pressing against her chest like a physical thing. 3 years of careful professionalism hung in the balance, along with her career, her reputation, and her heart. Camilla, Kevin whispered, his voice rough with vulnerability. Please, tell me what you're thinking. Instead of answering with words, she did something that surprised them both. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question rather than a statement. But when Kevin's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer with desperate relief, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of weeks of suppressed longing and Saturday night conversations that had changed everything. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Kevin rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if trying to memorize the moment. Is that your answer? He asked softly. I'm terrified, Camilla admitted, her hands fisted in the lapels of his suit jacket. This could ruin everything. Or it could be the best thing that ever happened to either of us. She looked up at him, seeing hope and fear warring in his expression, emotions that mirrored her own. What happens now? Kevin's hands traced down her arms, settling at her waist. Now we figure it out together. Carefully, quietly. His expression grew serious. I meant what I said about protecting your career. We'll keep this completely separate from work until we know what. If this is real, he said simply, if it's worth the risk we're both taking. A knock on the conference room door made them spring apart like guilty teenagers. Through the frosted glass, they could see a silhouette approaching. Kevin quickly moved to the other side of the table, grabbing some papers and arranging them as if they'd been in a legitimate meeting. Come in, he called, his voice remarkably steady. Janet from HR entered with a stack of files, stopping short when she saw them. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the room was occupied. The calendar showed it as available. We were just finishing up, Kevin replied smoothly. The Whitmore account quarterly review. Ms. Topaz was providing some excellent insights. Camilla nodded, hoping her expression looked professional rather than like a woman who had just kissed her boss and discovered that the world could tilt on its axis in the space of a heartbeat. Of course, Janet said, though her eyes lingered curiously on Camilla's slightly mussed appearance. I'll come back later. After Janet left, Kevin and Camilla looked at each other across the conference table. The moment felt surreal, standing in the same room where board meetings determined company policy, where million-dollar deals were negotiated, where she just made a decision that could change the trajectory of her entire life. This is going to be complicated, Camilla said quietly. The best things usually are. Kevin's smile was soft, transforming his face from the stern CEO others knew into someone warmer, more human. Can I take you to dinner tonight? Somewhere that's not Meridian, somewhere we won't run into anyone from work. The invitation hung between them, laden with possibility and promise. This would be their first real date, the first time they chose to be together rather than stumbling into each other through coincidence and matchmaking friends. Yes, she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. But I drive myself, and we leave separately. Agreed. There's a small Italian place in Brooklyn Heights. Intimate, quiet, family-owned, the kind of place where business executives don't usually venture. He pulled out his phone, typing quickly. I'm sending you the address. Camilla's phone buzzed with his message, and seeing his name in her personal text messages felt like crossing another line, making this real in a way that conference room conversations couldn't. 7 o'clock? He asked. 7 o'clock. They gathered their respective papers, the legitimate Whitmore files that had provided cover for their meeting, and prepared to leave separately, maintaining the careful distance that would now be both protection and performance. At the door, Kevin caught her hand gently. Camilla. She turned back, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was tenderness there, and gratitude, and something that looked dangerously like the beginning of love. Thank you, he said simply, for taking the leap with me. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the conference room with the lingering scent of his cologne and the realization that she had just agreed to the most dangerous and exciting adventure of her life. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of routine tasks and anxious anticipation. Camilla found herself checking the clock every few minutes, her stomach performing acrobatics that had nothing to do with the salad she'd barely touched at lunch. When Jasmine stopped by her desk at 5:30, Camilla was staring at her computer screen without seeing a single number on the spreadsheet. You okay, girl? You look like you've seen a ghost. Just tired, Camilla lied, minimizing her screen before Jasmine could see that she'd typed the same formula 6 times without hitting enter. Want to grab drinks after work? There's that new place downtown with the cute bartender you pretended not to notice last week. The invitation was tempting, normal, safe, uncomplicated, a way to avoid thinking about what she was about to do, about the man who was probably in his office right now thinking about her the same way she was thinking about him. Can't tonight. I have plans. Jasmine's eyebrows rose with interest. Plans? What kind of plans? Does this have anything to do with why you've been walking around like you're carrying some kind of secret? It's nothing, Camilla said quickly, then realized how unconvincing that sounded. It's just dinner, with a friend. Uh-huh. Jasmine's expression was skeptical but not unkind. Well, whoever this friend is, they better treat you right. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. As Jasmine walked away, Camilla touched her lips unconsciously, remembering the way Kevin had kissed her like she was precious. like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. And as 6 o'clock approached, she realized that she was about to find out if Kevin Keller could indeed see how amazing she was, or if she was about to make the most beautiful mistake of her life. The real person emerges when all pretenses fall away. The Italian restaurant in Brooklyn Heights was everything Kevin had promised. Intimate tables tucked into cozy corners, exposed brick walls lined with vintage photographs of Sicily, and the kind of warm lighting that made everyone look like they were starring in their own romantic movie. The scent of garlic and fresh basil filled the air, along with the gentle murmur of conversations in multiple languages. Camilla arrived first, her nerves jangling like wind chimes in a storm. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on a deep emerald wrap dress that brought out the golden undertones in her skin, paired with heels that were comfortable enough for walking, but elegant enough to match the butterflies performing aerial stunts in her stomach. This felt different from Meridian. That had been accidental, a cosmic joke that had revealed something neither of them had been looking for. This was intentional, chosen, weighted with the knowledge of what they were risking and the hope of what they might find. "Buonasera, signorina," the elderly owner greeted her with a warm smile. "You must be here for the 7 o'clock reservation. Your gentleman called ahead. He wanted to make sure you had the best table in the house." He led her to a corner table with a view of the harbor, where fairy lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and the Manhattan skyline provided a glittering backdrop. A single white rose lay across her place setting, and despite herself, Camilla smiled. Kevin had remembered her mentioning that white roses were her favorite, a detail from Saturday night that she'd assumed he'd forgotten. 5 minutes later, she saw him through the window, pausing on the sidewalk to check his phone and run a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture that made him seem younger, more vulnerable. He was dressed casually for the first time she'd seen outside the office. Dark jeans that fit him perfectly, a charcoal sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders, and a leather jacket that suggested there were layers to Kevin Keller she had yet to discover. When he spotted her through the window, his entire face transformed. The smile that spread across his features was pure and unguarded, the kind of expression that made her remember why she'd taken this terrifying leap in the first place. "So you found it," he said as he joined her, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her cheek. The gesture was casual, natural, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. "It's perfect," she replied, touching the white rose. "Thank you for this. Thank you for saying yes." Kevin settled into the chair across from her, and she could see him making a conscious effort to relax, to let go of the controlled composure he wore like armor in the office. "I'll be honest, I've been nervous all afternoon." "You? Nervous?" Camilla laughed softly. "The man who negotiates million-dollar contracts before breakfast gets nervous about dinner." "Those contracts don't matter to me the way this does," Kevin said simply, and the honesty in his voice made her chest tighten with emotion. "Those are just business. This is—" "What?" she prompted when he trailed off. "Everything," he finished quietly. "This feels like everything." Their server approached, a young woman with paint-stained fingers who looked like she spent her days creating art and her evenings serving food to pay the bills. Kevin ordered wine in perfect Italian, his accent flawless, and Camilla found herself falling a little deeper into the mystery of who this man really was beneath the CEO facade. "How many languages do you actually speak?" she asked after the server left. "Enough to get myself in trouble in most major cities," Kevin replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Languages were my escape when I was younger. Easier to lose myself in conjugating verbs than dealing with—" "With what?" Kevin was quiet for a moment, swirling the wine that had appeared as if by magic. "My father built this company from nothing. Immigrant's son, worked 3 jobs to put himself through business school. Never missed an opportunity to remind me that everything I had was because of his sacrifice." The vulnerability in his voice made Camilla's heart ache. This was the first time he'd mentioned his family, the first glimpse behind the carefully constructed success story. "He sounds demanding." He was brilliant, ruthless, completely devoted to building something that would last. Kevin's fingers traced the rim of his wine glass. "He died when I was 25, and suddenly I was responsible for everything he'd created. No time to figure out who I was apart from his expectations." "Is that why you learned languages? To be someone else for a while?" Kevin looked up at her, surprise flickering across his features. "No one's ever asked me that before. What do people usually ask you? About profit margins, market expansion, stock prices?" His smile was rueful. "You're the first person in years who seemed interested in the man behind the business plan." The admission hung between them, and Camilla realized that Kevin Keller powerful, successful, envied by half the corporate world, was lonely in a way that made her want to wrap her arms around him and never let go. "What about you?" he asked, clearly wanting to shift the focus away from his own vulnerabilities. "What shaped the woman who can dissect a budget like a surgeon and quote her grandmother's wisdom in the same breath?" "Necessity," Camilla replied honestly. "When your parents die and you're suddenly responsible for your own survival at 12, you learn to adapt quickly. My grandmother taught me strength, but life taught me resilience. That must have been terrifying." "It was, but it also taught me that I could survive anything, that I didn't need anyone else to save me or complete me." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Which makes this us even more complicated. I've spent 16 years building walls to protect myself, and I'm asking you to tear them down. You're asking me to trust you with everything I've worked to protect." Kevin reached across the table, covering her hand with his. His touch was warm, steady, and somehow managed to calm the anxiety that had been churning in her stomach all day. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said quietly. "I know I'm asking you to risk your career, your reputation, maybe your peace of mind, but I'm willing to risk mine too. For this, for you." Their food arrived, handmade pasta that melted on their tongues, wine that tasted like sunshine and possibility. But Camilla barely noticed. She was lost in the way Kevin looked at her, like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. The way he listened to her stories about community college and night shifts, and the dreams she'd built, one careful step at a time. As the evening wore on, the restaurant grew quieter around them. Other couples paid their checks and wandered out into the Brooklyn night. But Camilla and Kevin remained, talking about everything and nothing, discovering the small details that made them human. "I have a confession," Kevin said as they shared tiramisu that was probably a work of art disguised as dessert. "Only one?" "I've been wanting to ask you out for 8 months, he admitted, his cheeks slightly flushed from wine and honesty. "Since that budget meeting where you quietly corrected my math and saved the company from a $250,000 accounting error. You remember that?" Camilla was genuinely surprised. The meeting had been routine, the error minor, or so she'd thought. "I remember everything about you," Kevin said simply. "The way you bite your pen when you're concentrating, how you always bring coffee to Janet in HR because you know she's working double shifts to pay for her daughter's medical school. The fact that you volunteer at the literacy center every other Saturday, even though you never put it on your company bio." The knowledge that he'd been paying such close attention made her feel exposed and cherished all at once. "How do you know about the literacy center? I make it my business to know about people who matter to me, and I matter to you." Kevin's expression grew serious, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Camilla, you matter to me more than I know how to say, more than is probably wise or professional or safe." And in that moment, sitting in a small Italian restaurant with Kevin's confession hanging between them like a promise, Camilla realized that she was falling in love with a man who could destroy everything she'd built, or become everything she'd never dared to dream. Love grows in the spaces between what we say and what we feel. 6 weeks of stolen moments had taught Camilla the art of living a double life. By day, she was Ms. Topaz, efficient, professional, maintaining careful distance from the CEO who ran board meetings with the same hands that had traced her face in the darkness of his apartment just hours before. By night, she was simply Camilla, laughing over takeout containers in Kevin's kitchen, falling asleep against his chest while old movies played on his television, discovering that the man who commanded corporate empires also made terrible pancakes and sang off-key in the shower. The secrecy was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. "Earth to Camilla," Jasmine's voice cut through her thoughts, accompanied by the sound of fingers snapping near her ear. "Where did you go just now?" They were sitting in the break room, sharing lunch and the kind of mundane office gossip that had once been the highlight of Camilla's workday. Now conversations like this felt like navigating a minefield. Every question about her weekend plans, every comment about her improved mood, every observation about the mysterious glow that apparently followed her around like perfume. "Sorry," Camilla replied, stabbing her salad with more force than necessary. "Just thinking about the Henderson account." "Uh-huh." Jasmine's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. "The Henderson account that has you smiling at your computer screen and humming while you work. Must be some fascinating spreadsheets." Before Camilla could formulate a response that didn't involve admitting she'd been replaying Kevin's whispered "good morning" from when he'd called her at 6 a.m. just to hear her voice, her phone buzzed with a text. "K. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. Need Whitmore projections updated." Can you have them ready? The message was perfectly professional, revealing nothing of the man who had held her hand across his kitchen table that morning while she stole sips of his coffee and pretended to read the financial section. But Camilla knew Kevin well enough now to read the subtext. I need a reason to see you that won't raise suspicions. C. Of course. I'll have them ready by 2:30. K. Thank you. Your efficiency is appreciated. The word appreciated made her stomach flutter because she knew it was Kevin's way of saying he missed her in a message that anyone could read without raising eyebrows. Work emergency? Jasmine asked, noticing Camilla's expression. Just the Whitmore account. Mr. Keller needs updated projections for the board meeting. He's been asking for a lot of reports from you lately, Jasmine observed, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. You must be making quite an impression. The comment hit too close to home, and Camilla felt heat rise in her cheeks. He's detail-oriented. You know how he is about thoroughness. Jasmine's expression suggested she was filing this information away for future analysis. Just be careful, Cam. Office rumors can be dangerous, especially when they involve someone with that much power. There are no rumors, Camilla said quickly. Perhaps too quickly. Not yet, Jasmine replied quietly. But people notice things. The way you've been coming in earlier, staying later. How you always seem to know when he's going to be in meetings. Little things that add up. The warning sent a chill down Camilla's spine. She'd been so careful, so conscious of maintaining professional distance during office hours, but apparently love had its own language that was harder to hide than she'd thought. At 2:25, Camilla knocked on Kevin's office door, her arms full of folders, and her heart full of anticipation she couldn't show on her face. Come in. Kevin was standing with his back to the door, looking out at the city skyline. When he turned, his expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held warmth that made her want to close the distance between them and forget all about board meetings and professional boundaries. The Whitmore projections, she said, placing the folders on his desk. Thank you. He moved closer, ostensibly to review the documents, but close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. These look comprehensive. I included the quarterly comparisons you requested, plus projections for the next fiscal year. She kept her voice steady, professional, even as his fingers brushed hers when he reached for the top folder. Excellent work, as always. Kevin's voice was low, meant only for her ears. You've been working late on these. The work required it. Or maybe, he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment too long. You wanted an excuse to stay close to the office. The comment was dangerous, loaded with implications that anyone walking in could misinterpret, but it was also true. She had been finding reasons to work late, knowing Kevin often stayed past 8, hoping for the occasional moment when they might find themselves alone in an empty office building. Mr. Keller, she said carefully, is there anything else you need for the board meeting? The formal address was a warning, a reminder that they were in his office where anyone could interrupt, where glass walls made privacy an illusion. Kevin stepped back, his expression shifting to match her professional tone. Nothing else. Thank you for your efficiency, Miss Topaz. But as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her at the door. Miss Topaz? Yes? I have a dinner meeting tonight with potential investors. It may run late. The words were spoken for any potential listeners, but his eyes held a different message. I won't be able to call you tonight. I'll miss you. Of course. I hope it goes well. I'm sure it will. Camilla left his office with steady steps and a racing heart, the brief encounter leaving her both satisfied and desperate for more. These stolen moments, the brush of fingers over business documents, the coded messages in professional conversations, were becoming both sustenance and torture. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks and hyper-awareness. Every time Kevin's name was mentioned in meetings, every glimpse of him in the hallway, every innocuous email felt charged with significance that she couldn't share with anyone. At 6:30, as the office emptied around her, Camilla's phone rang. The caller ID made her heart skip. Kevin. Hello? She answered carefully, aware that a few stragglers were still within earshot. I lied about the dinner meeting. Kevin's voice was soft, intimate, meant only for her. I'm at home, and I was wondering if you might want to come over. I could cook, well, attempt to cook, and we could have the evening we both actually want. Camilla glanced around the nearly empty office, calculating risks and possibilities. That sounds nice, but I should probably work late tonight. There's a lot to catch up on. Of course, work is important. Kevin's tone suggested he understood her caution, But if you happen to finish early, you know where to find me." After hanging up, Camilla sat in the gathering darkness of her cubicle, watching the lights of the city twinkle to life beyond the windows. The smart thing would be to go home to her own apartment, to maintain the careful distance that had protected them so far. But as she gathered her things and walked toward the elevator, she found herself thinking about Kevin alone in his apartment, probably ordering takeout and watching the kind of mindless television that filled the silence, but not the loneliness. In the parking garage, she paused beside her car, keys in hand, caught between desire and prudence. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Kay, no pressure, but I bought ingredients for that pasta dish you mentioned your grandmother used to make. Thought maybe you could teach me." The message was Kevin's way of saying he wanted more than just her company. He wanted her memories, her stories, the pieces of herself that she'd never shared with anyone else. He was offering to learn the recipes that connected her to her past, to become part of the tradition that had shaped her. And in that moment, standing alone in a corporate parking garage with the weight of secrets and the promise of love pressing against her chest, Camilla realized that some risks were worth taking, even if they meant driving across town to teach the CEO of Hartley & Associates how to make her grandmother's Sunday gravy. The strongest love is tested by the deepest fears. 3 months into their secret affair, Camilla thought she had mastered the delicate balance between professional distance and private intimacy. She was wrong. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Camilla arrived at Hartley & Associates with coffee that tasted like possibility and a text from Kevin that had made her smile during the entire elevator ride. "Good morning, beautiful. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you later." She was still thinking about the way he'd looked at her across his kitchen table, about the gentle way he'd traced patterns on her palm while she told him stories about her grandmother's Sunday dinners, when Jasmine appeared at her cubicle with an expression that made Camilla's blood turn to ice. "We need to talk," Jasmine said quietly. "Conference room, now." The small conference room felt like a trap. Jasmine closed the door and turned to face Camilla with the kind of serious expression usually reserved for performance reviews and bad medical diagnoses. "I know," Jasmine said simply. "Know what?" Camilla's voice came out steadier than she felt, though her hands betrayed her by trembling slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "About you and Kevin Keller." The words hit like a physical blow. Camilla felt the color drain from her face, felt the careful world she'd built over the past 3 months begin to crumble around her feet. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said weakly. "Cam, please, give me some credit." Jasmine's voice was gentle but firm. "You've been glowing for months. You know things about his schedule that you shouldn't know. Yesterday, I saw you delete a text message so fast you nearly threw your phone across the room. And last week, when I mentioned that gossip about him dating some socialite, you looked like someone had slapped you." Camilla sank into one of the conference room chairs, the fight going out of her as quickly as it had come. "How long have you known?" "I suspected for weeks. I knew for sure yesterday when I saw you two in the parking garage." "You saw us?" Panic fluttered in Camilla's chest like a trapped bird. "I was leaving late, and I saw you get into his car. You kissed him goodbye, Cam. Anyone could have seen." The words struck terror into Camilla's heart. She and Kevin had been so careful, so conscious of maintaining distance during work hours, but last night, after spending the evening cooking together in his apartment, teaching him to make her grandmother's recipes while he made her laugh with his terrible Portuguese pronunciation, she'd let her guard down for just one moment. One moment that could destroy everything. "Who else knows?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "As far as I know, just me, but Cam..." Jasmine leaned forward, her expression serious. "This is dangerous. Not just for your career, but for both of you. If this gets out..." "It won't get out," Camilla said quickly. "We're being careful. You weren't being careful yesterday, and you won't be able to be careful forever. This kind of thing, it has a way of revealing itself. And when it does, you'll be the one who pays the price, not him." The truth of those words hit Camilla like a freight train. In all her worrying about office gossip and professional boundaries, she'd somehow convinced herself that she and Kevin were equal partners in this risk. But they weren't. He was the CEO, the founder, the man whose name was on the building. She was an analyst who could be dismissed with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. "What are you saying?" Camilla asked, though she already knew. "I'm saying that men like Kevin Keller don't marry women like us, Cam. They have affairs with us. They enjoy our company until something more suitable comes along." Jasmine's voice was compassionate but brutal. "I've seen this before. Rich, powerful men who want to play with fire for a while before they go back to their real lives. Kevin's not like that, Camilla protested, but even as she said it, doubts began creeping in like shadows at twilight. How well did she really know him? Their entire relationship existed in the careful bubble they'd created. His apartment, quiet restaurants in distant neighborhoods, stolen moments in empty offices. She'd never met his friends, never been introduced to anyone in his social circle, never been anywhere they might encounter his real life. Maybe he's not, Jasmine said gently. Maybe he really cares about you. But what happens when his board of directors finds out? When it becomes a scandal that threatens his company? How much will you matter to him then? Before Camilla could answer, before she could voice the fears that Jasmine's words had awakened, her phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Emergency board meeting called for 11 a.m. Need to see you beforehand. My office, 10:30. The timing felt ominous, as if the universe was determined to test every fear Jasmine had just articulated. I have to go, Camilla said, standing on unsteady legs. Cam, please, think about what I've said. Think about what you're risking. Camilla walked to Kevin's office in a daze, Jasmine's words echoing in her mind like a funeral dirge. Men like Kevin Keller don't marry women like us. The phrase had lodged itself in her chest like a splinter, small but impossible to ignore. She knocked on Kevin's door at exactly 10:30, her professional mask firmly in place despite the chaos in her heart. Come in. Kevin was pacing behind his desk, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of stress and pressure. Close the door, he said, without looking up. The request sent alarm bells ringing in Camilla's mind. Kevin never asked her to close the door, unless they were discussing something sensitive, and even then it was rare. What's wrong? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Kevin stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before, something that looked like guilt and desperation, wrapped in expensive fabric. There's been a development, he said carefully. The Hartwell Corporation wants to merge with us. It would be the biggest acquisition in our company's history. That's good news, isn't it? Camilla couldn't understand why he looked like he was delivering a death sentence. It would be, except Kevin sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 34 years. Except Richard Hartwell is old-fashioned about certain things: family values, traditional relationships, corporate image. His people have been asking questions about my personal life, about whether I'm the kind of man who can represent their brand. The pieces clicked together in Camilla's mind with sickening clarity. They want you to be married. Not exactly married, but settled, committed to someone appropriate. Kevin's eyes met hers, and she could see the pain there, the impossible choice he was trying not to make. Someone who fits their image of what a CEO's partner should be. Someone who isn't me, Camilla said quietly. Kevin's silence was answer enough, and in that moment, sitting in Kevin Keller's office, while her heart shattered into pieces small enough to fit in the spaces between his words, Camilla realized that Jasmine had been right about everything, except the part about Kevin not caring. He cared enough to look destroyed by the choice he was about to make, but not enough to choose her over everything else he'd built. Love isn't about choosing the safe path, it's about choosing each other. The boardroom had never felt smaller. Camilla sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table, surrounded by 15 executives in identical navy suits, watching Kevin deliver the presentation that would secure Hartley & Associates' future and potentially destroy theirs. Richard Hartwell commanded attention from his position at Kevin's right hand, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of old money confidence that came from generations of never having to prove himself to anyone. His pale blue eyes had assessed Camilla when introductions were made, cataloguing her presence with the dispassion of someone evaluating office furniture. The merger will position both companies for unprecedented growth, Kevin was saying, his voice steady and professional despite the tension Camilla could read in the set of his shoulders. Hartwell Corporation's international reach combined with our technological innovations creates unlimited potential. For 2 hours, Camilla had sat through presentations about market share and profit projections, watching Kevin perform the role of CEO with masterful precision while her heart slowly cracked apart. Every time he looked in her direction, his eyes held apologies she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. The meeting was winding down when Hartwell's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she'd been born wearing pearls, leaned over to whisper something in his ear. Hartwell nodded, then turned to Kevin with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Before we finalize anything," Hartwell said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "I'd like to discuss the personal elements of this partnership. As you know, Hartwell Corporation values stability and traditional family structures in our leadership team." Camilla felt her stomach plummet. This was it, the moment Jasmine had warned her about, the inevitable collision between her heart and Kevin's ambition. "Of course," Kevin replied carefully. "I understand your concerns about corporate image." "Excellent. My research team has identified several suitable candidates for your consideration. The daughter of Senator Williams, for instance, or perhaps Elizabeth Thorne from the Thorne banking family. Women with the proper background and social connections to represent our merged companies appropriately." The casual way Hartwell discussed Kevin's personal life like a business transaction made Camilla's hands clench into fists beneath the table. She watched Kevin's face, searching for any sign of the man who had held her close just days ago, who had whispered that she was everything he'd never known he wanted. "Mr. Hartwell," Kevin said slowly, and something in his tone made everyone in the room pay closer attention. "I appreciate your concern for the company's image. However, I'm afraid there's something you should know." "Oh?" Hartwell's eyebrows rose slightly. Kevin stood up, straightening his tie with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice carried across the room with quiet conviction. "I'm already in a relationship. With someone who means more to me than any merger, any business deal, or any amount of money." The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla felt her heart stop, restart, then begin racing so fast she was afraid everyone could hear it. Around the table, executives exchanged glances that ranged from shocked to scandalized. "I see," Hartwell said slowly, his expression cooling by several degrees. "And this person, is she someone we've met?" Kevin's eyes found Camilla's across the length of the table, and in that moment she saw him make a choice that would change both their lives forever. "Yes," he said simply. "Camilla Topaz. She's sitting right here." The confession hit the room like a lightning strike. Camilla heard someone gasp, saw papers shuffle nervously, felt 15 pairs of eyes turn to stare at her with expressions ranging from surprise to barely concealed disapproval. But she only had eyes for Kevin, who was looking at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. "Ms. Topaz," Kevin continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "is the most intelligent, capable, and extraordinary woman I've ever known. She's been the heart of this company's success for 3 years, and she's been the heart of my life for the past 3 months. Any organization that can't see her value isn't one I want to be associated with." Hartwell's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "Mr. Keller, I'm afraid this changes things considerably. Hartwell Corporation cannot be associated with irregular arrangements." "Then I'm afraid," Kevin said, his voice calm but final, "that Hartwell Corporation will have to find another company to merge with." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at the feet of convention and expectation. Camilla couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the magnitude of what Kevin had just done. He'd chosen her, over money, over security, over everything he'd spent his life building. "You're making a mistake," Hartwell said, standing abruptly. "A very expensive mistake." "No," Kevin replied, his eyes never leaving Camilla's face. "I'm making the first right choice I've made in years." As Hartwell and his entourage gathered their materials and swept from the room in a flurry of outraged dignity, the remaining executives sat in stunned silence. Finally, Kevin's CFO cleared his throat. "Well," he said dryly, "I suppose we should start looking at other partnership opportunities." "We should," Kevin agreed, but his attention was focused entirely on Camilla, who was still sitting frozen in her chair, trying to process what had just happened. One by one, the executives filed out, leaving Kevin and Camilla alone in the vast boardroom, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of a city that suddenly looked full of infinite possibility. "You just walked away from $50 million, Camilla said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I walked away from a prison," Kevin corrected, moving around the table to where she sat. "Camilla, I've spent my entire adult life building something I thought mattered, but none of it means anything without you. Your company will survive, will thrive actually, because I'll be running it for the right reasons, instead of just following my father's playbook." Kevin knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm sorry it took me so long to realize what really matters. I'm sorry I let you think, even for a moment, that you weren't worth everything." Camilla looked into his eyes. These blue eyes that had watched her across boardroom tables and breakfast tables, that had seen her at her most professional and her most vulnerable, and realized that this was what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to choose love despite it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Kevin said, his smile transforming his entire face, "we figure out how to run a company together, officially, as partners, in every sense of the word. People will talk. Let them talk. Let them see what it looks like when two people choose each other over everything else the world tells them they should want." Camilla felt tears sliding down her cheeks, tears of relief, of joy, of overwhelming gratitude for a man brave enough to bet everything on love. "Kevin Keller," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "are you asking me to be your business partner?" "I'm asking you to be my everything," he replied simply. "Business partner, life partner, the person I choose every day for the rest of my life if you'll have me." And in that moment, surrounded by the ruins of one future and the promise of another, Camilla realized that sometimes the greatest victories come from the choices that terrify you most, and sometimes love really is worth risking everything for. 1 year later, the autumn rain painted abstract patterns on the floor-to-ceiling windows of what had once been Kevin Keller's solitary office and was now the shared workspace of Topaz Keller Enterprises. Camilla stood at those same windows, where she'd once watched him pace during late-night phone calls, but now the view held different possibilities, a future built on partnership rather than hierarchy, on love rather than longing. "The Meridian Group proposal looks promising," Kevin said from behind the desk they'd learned to share, his voice carrying the same warmth it held when he whispered good morning against her ear each day. "Their values align with ours, and they're not interested in changing our leadership structure." Camilla turned from the window, taking in the sight that never failed to make her heart skip. Kevin in shirt sleeves and loosened tie, reading glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in the work they'd built together. The severe corporate portraits had been replaced with photographs that told their story. The company retreat, where they'd announced their engagement, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their first international office, candid shots of them laughing during board meetings that felt more like family dinners. "Much better than our last merger attempt," she replied with a smile that held the memory of a boardroom confrontation that had changed everything. The past year had transformed more than just their relationship status. Hartley and Associates had become Topaz Keller Enterprises, a name that represented true partnership. The company had not only survived Kevin's rejection of the Hartwell merger, it had thrived, attracting clients who valued authenticity over artifice, substance over appearance. "Any regrets?" Camilla asked, settling into the chair across from his desk, a question that had become their evening ritual, a way of checking in with each other and the choices that had brought them here. Kevin looked up from the contracts, his blue eyes holding the same wonder they'd carried the day he'd chosen her over $50 million and society's expectations. "Only one," he said seriously, and her heart stuttered for a moment before he continued. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that the most important mergers happen in the heart, not the boardroom." The response was so quintessentially Kevin, romantic sentiment wrapped in business metaphors, that Camilla couldn't help but laugh. It was the same laugh that had echoed through their apartment that morning when he'd attempted to make pancakes and somehow managed to set off the smoke detector. The same laugh that had filled the church 3 months ago when they'd promised to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. "Speaking of heart mergers," Kevin said, standing and moving around the desk to where she sat, "I have something for you." "It's not my birthday," Camilla protested, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "It's the anniversary of the day I stopped being an idiot," Kevin replied, pulling a small wrapped box from his desk drawer. "1 year ago today, you taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits your life. It's about building a life worth sharing." Inside the box was a key, antique brass, worn smooth by time, attached to a simple chain. "What does it open?" Camilla asked, though tears were already gathering in her eyes because she suspected she knew. "The house on Maple Street, the one you fell in love with during our Sunday drives. The one with the garden where you said your grandmother would have grown tomatoes and taught neighborhood children to read." Kevin's voice was soft, full of the dreams they'd shared during late-night conversations about the life they wanted to build. "I bought it this morning. Thought maybe it was time we had a place that was ours from the beginning, not inherited from my father's expectations or built around anyone else's definition of success." Camilla looked at the key, this small piece of metal that represented so much more than property ownership. It was Kevin's way of saying that their love deserved a foundation built on their own terms, in a space where they could plant gardens and host Sunday dinners, and maybe, someday, teach their own children about courage and choice. "There's something else," Kevin continued, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking about what you said last month, about wanting to do more than just generate profit. What would you think about starting a foundation, something focused on education and entrepreneurship for young women who need the kind of opportunities your grandmother never had?" The proposal took her breath away, not just because of the generosity behind it, but because it proved that Kevin had been listening to all her quiet dreams, the ones she'd shared during pillow talk and kitchen conversations when she'd thought he was half asleep. "How you want to give money away," she teased, though her voice was thick with emotion. "I want to invest in the future," Kevin corrected, "in the next generation of brilliant women who deserve the chance to choose love and success, not one or the other." Camilla stood and walked back to the windows, looking out at the city where their story had begun, with a blind date that wasn't blind at all, where they'd learned that the best surprises come disguised as ordinary Tuesday evenings and emergency board meetings. "You know what I think," she said finally, turning back to face the man who had chosen her over everything else the world had to offer. "What?" "I think your father would be proud, not of the money or the mergers or the magazine covers, but of the man you became when you stopped trying to live his life and started living your own." Kevin's smile was soft, vulnerable, the expression of a man who had finally made peace with his past and was ready to embrace his future. "I love you, Camilla Topaz Keller," he said, using the name she'd chosen to honor both her heritage and their partnership. "I love you too, Kevin Keller," she replied. "Even when you make terrible pancakes and set off smoke detectors." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the office in golden light that made everything look like possibility. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of expectation, something real from the ruins of convention. They had chosen each other, and in doing so had chosen the kind of love that changes not just two hearts, but the world around them. In a world that often forces us to choose between love and ambition, between following our hearts and meeting others' expectations, what would you have done in Kevin's position? Would you have chosen love over a $50 million merger? Or would you have tried to find a compromise that satisfied everyone else's demands? What did this story teach you about the courage it takes to choose authenticity over approval, and about the kind of love that's worth risking everything for? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.